Welcome back to the On the Ball podcast, another episode of the greatest potty going round, and we're here for the final NFL episode of the week. Third of a 3-episode series. Obviously, we've done the review, the preview so far. If you haven't watched those or listened to those, go back and do that. They're very good. If I can say that myself. Once again, here by myself. We'll likely have the boys back or some guests next week, so stay tuned for that. But what we're going to do today is our usual fantasy. So I'm going to go through the main 4 fantasy positions being quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. And I'm going to discuss a few people who have fallen and risen in my personal rankings heading into this weekend. And yeah, who I think you should maybe not necessarily buy low, but someone who I think is maybe being underrated or overrated in the community right now. And that can help your team moving forward. Before we get into it, just a little recap from last week. I'm actually trying to remember how it went. I got the win because I'm still undefeated. I actually beat friend of the show, Pilch. But I remember that I didn't score. Actually, no, I scored pretty well now that I think about it. Yeah, no, I did well. I think I got like 150 or something. I had Devo Samuel go really big. Also brought in Jalen Hurts, who performed as I was hoping. And I also had Myles Gaskin in my flex, give me about 0.3. So I think I did pretty well to score well. He was without his main gun, Christian McCaffrey. So just looking at that, I was expected to win. But after 2 really poor weeks of sub 100 scores, I was a bit concerned. But happy to be 4-0. However, am still a little bit concerned about my team. Traded away Robert Woods this morning before Thursday Night Football and saw what he did. So yeah, look, my confidence right now is pretty low, but I'm looking forward to some big trading action this weekend. I've just finished my rankings for the week and I've got some spicy takes in there. So hopefully I don't give away too much to those in my league listening here, but let me know how you're going in your league. Let me know any trade suggestions for me. If you think there's any players who are flying under the radar right now, let me know if you want my opinion on any of your trade talks or your start sits, anything like that. Always keen to hear what you guys have to say. So starting with the quarterbacks, my league plays a 2 QB system. So there's some who are more relevant in ours or people with a 2 QB system than a 1 QB league. But I've tried to stick to the main guys here. Risers, I've got Derek Carr. Even though he didn't have his best week against the Chargers, for me, just looking back at his first month, I always go, I'm pretty conservative when it comes into buying into early season form, especially for someone like Derek Carr, who's sort of done it in the past and burnt us. But he's played the Ravens, the Steelers, the Dolphins, and the Chargers. And if you ranked the defenses 1 to 32 in the preseason, these would probably be in the top 8. So the fact that he's the QB 11 right now is pretty impressive. His schedule doesn't get much easier. I will say that. They have got a rough schedule this year. However, something I do like is that his throwing percentage isn't outrageous right now. I think his average is in the low 60s. There's room for improvement. A lot of times you see someone ball out as a quarterback and they're throwing at 80% and you just know that's not sustainable. So that's something we don't have to worry about with Derek Carr. If anything, it might improve. And turnovers is also another thing. That often happens. They might go on a streak of no interceptions, no fumbles, and then all of a sudden that starts to happen a bit more regularly, and we see their scores be a lot lower. Where I think he's had 3 interceptions so far in the year, so we're definitely not seeing a perfect Derek Carr, and I don't think he's really at the level of quarterback where he's going to go, 8 weeks without a pick. So I'm not really suggesting that those are going to stop, but I'm just saying it's sort of a red flag that we don't have to worry about in this situation. Something else that really took my fancy was I always get a bit concerned when Josh Jacobs is in the lineup because I know John Gruden does love going to him on the big plays, but he only had 1 red zone carry in this. Carr had 1 red zone carry, and he also had 3 red zone attempts. So it wasn't a great game in all for the Raiders, but the fact that they had a 3-1, 3-2, but realistically take away Derek Carr's carry, a 3-1 throwing to rushing ratio in the red zone, always really, really positive. And yeah, Derek Carr is playing really well as well, just in terms of the eyeball test. So that's something I like to see. Some of his young receivers, Hunter Renfrow didn't have his greatest game. And there's definitely, I think Edwards and Ruggs are going to keep improving. So I definitely like the look of Derek Carr right now. My other one is Daniel Jones. Another guy who I've been pretty conservative with so far this season, but I'm finally going to admit that he's a pretty decent option. I don't think he's that relevant in one QB leagues. I'm not sure if these two are really relevant in one QB leagues, but I think they're definitely good backups with the buys coming up next week. He's currently the QB6, but something I really liked about his performance on the weekend was he had 402 yards, passing yards. That's just not something we've come to expect. I know there was overtime, but all in all, without two of his best receivers in Slayton and Shepard, against a pretty good Saints defense, that's really, really good. It looks like his combination with Golladay is coming along pretty nicely. We already seen him in his first game for the club throw a deep shot to John Ross. Tony looks like he's coming along nicely. Barkley looks like he's back to his best form. And yeah, things are really looking up for this Giants offense. And what's even better is their defense isn't actually playing that well. So it looks like they're going to be in a lot of high-scoring, close games. And another great thing about Daniel Jones is he's averaging about 50 yards on the ground. So if you can just pocket those 5 points every week, all of a sudden, like realistically, if Daniel Jones averages 20 for the year, you're pretty happy with that. So if he gets 50 yards every week rushing, then he's only got to get 15 from the passing game, and he's going to have the odd touchdown on the ground as well. So yeah, definitely like the look of that. And he's also not having many turnovers, which is something that he has seemed to improve in his game, which is good to see. Fallers, I've got Dak Prescott. I think we might have talked about him last week in the podcast, but I don't think he was my number one faller, but he is this week. He's had less than 30 attempts in these last 3 games, which is really concerning. It's something, I know Russell Wilson's a really, really good player, and he's good in fantasy as well, but it's why I'm always reluctant to pick Russell Wilson, because I don't like having to, it's the way the Seattle offense is built, that he's going to get a lot of a large yards per completion, but I just don't like relying on 22, 23, 25 complete attempts. I much rather someone who's going to sling the ball 40 times a game. And that's what I thought Dak Prescott was going to be, but that is not the case. Their running game has been absolutely sensational. So they haven't had to throw it. And unfortunately, that is not good news for fantasy owners of Dak Prescott. He has, on the weekend, he had 3 red zone throws compared to 8 red zone carries. And I know the game script suited the run game a lot more, but the way this Dallas team is going and the way the Dallas defense is going as well, it looks like they're going to be ahead of the game a lot. So unfortunately for Dak Prescott owners, I don't think he's going to be that. Well, I actually had him I had him as the QB1 going into the year, honestly. After what we saw at the start of last season, I thought they were going to be in a lot of shootouts, scoring 40 points. He was going to be throwing 4 touchdowns a game. But the way their defense is playing right now, the way their running game's going, I don't think he's going to be required to be having 40, 50 dropbacks like he was last year. So, yeah, worried about Dak Prescott. Also worried about Justin Herbert. His team's 3-1, so you'd suggest the quarterback's going pretty well. But he's only had one score above 22, which is not great. And his schedule's pretty hard from here on out. And something that, similar to Dak Prescott, that I don't like about Herbert is their defense is playing really, really high-level stuff. And I think that means they're going to be in less shootouts than last year. I think the Chargers were involved in so many, like 35 to 33, 38 to 36 type games last year. And I just don't see that happening that much. I think they're an improved team on both sides of the ball. And I think that is actually a negative thing for fantasy, to be honest. I'm not a massive downer on Herbert. I still think he's a decent, even in a 1 QB league, I think he's still a decent option with upside. But his start to the season has definitely concerned me. Rises onto the running back position. Like most leagues, we run a 2 running back flex league, so only really the top dogs are relevant, but with the injuries right now, it's sort of slimming pretty quickly. But for me, the risers, my number one riser is Deandre Swift of the Detroit Lions. He's had a really tough run of fixtures so far, as the whole Detroit offense has. And one thing I just love about Deandre Swift is he's basically a wide receiver with running. Like, it's just the perfect fantasy setup on PPR. His floor is just so high. He averages about 11, 12 points a week just from, 6 catches, 60 yards on the ground. And add to that, I think so far he's averaging about 45 yards on the ground, but his yards per carry is like around 3.5. So let's get that up to the low fours. Give him a few extra carries because they're playing a weaker opposition, and we can see him getting 60 to 70 rushing yards, a rushing TD, and 12 points in the air. Like all of a sudden, he's a top three running back in the game. So yeah, I think Swift has brilliant upside, and I think right now he's undervalued because his average and like points isn't that high. So if someone has got him right now and maybe has had a bit of a rough start to the season and they look at his point scoring so far, they might go, that's someone who I could look to move on, and you could jump in and pick up a bargain in Deandre Swift. Someone else who hopefully they weren't watching Thursday night footy last night because this ballooned his value, but James Robinson, I was very high on this guy going into the season. I think a lot of the metrics were really low on him, to be honest. A lot of the consensus rankings. In the end, in the first couple of weeks, Carlos Hyde did take a lot of his action, and that did frighten me a little bit. But he's taken sole back duties. Like he's taken it back pretty much. We saw it last year. He was an absolute freak of a fantasy running back. I was lucky enough to have him last year, picked him up off the waivers in week 1, and he killed it for pretty much the whole season. He had 95% of snaps last week on offense, so that's a really, really good sign for fantasy owners. They've got a fairly easy fixture to come. I know that not really much is easy for the Jags, but that's still good. And on the weekend, James Robinson had 4 red zone touches, 3 carries, and 1 target. So, yeah, really, really good signs for James Robinson, especially if someone, picked him, traded for him after 2 weeks or something. You've got yourself a bargain there because he looks like he's starting running back once again. And we love to see it. I do love a bit of James Robinson, and he just looks really good. He looked so good against the Bengals. My fallers in the running back spot is Mike Davis. I actually was pretty high on this guy in the first couple of weeks. And we saw what he did in Carolina last year when McCaffrey went down. And I thought this was sort of going to be his backfield to run. And although they're not going to be a great team, I thought his fantasy potential was pretty high. However, sort of been pretty off on that call so far. Haven't had the toughest fixture yet, and he's only averaging 11 points a game. He's got a solid floor just because he sees quite a lot of carries and a little bit of air game action. But yeah, I just can't really see him putting up big numbers. Like realistically, for him to get 17, 18 plus, he's probably going to need 1 or 2 touchdowns, which just isn't happening right now. The touchdowns are either coming in the passing game or through Cordarrelle Patterson. So, yeah, it doesn't look good for Mike Davis right now. His yards per carry is really low. I think it was like 1 on the weekend. And that's not going to be the case for the whole year. But, yeah, definitely not ideal for Mike Davis. Nick Chubb is my other faller. Look, this guy is probably someone who, if you look at his average, like if you look at his score every week, you're probably like, oh, I don't really see the hype. But then he sort of just, through consistency, just ends up in the top 10. But I do believe he is in danger of not making the top 10 this year like people were expecting. I still think he's a starting running back, so don't worry about that. But I just think he might be being a little bit overvalued right now. He is just, as we all know, he just basically has he has no action in the air game, which is really bad for his fantasy take in PPPR. Why do I keep saying 3 Ps? It's just PPR. I'm trying to think what is PPPR. I don't know. But he's averaging 15 right now, and he hasn't really had the toughest fixture in terms of run defenses. So, yeah, that's definitely a concern for me with Nick Chubb. I know as the weather sort of starts to worsen, these high carries, sort of less relevant air game running backs start to come to the fore as the passing games around the NFL start to struggle with wet balls and cold conditions and stuff like that. But yeah, for me right now, I just don't really like what Nick Chubb offers. Yeah, I'm just not the biggest fan in terms of fantasy. Into the wide receivers, as I mentioned before, we have a flex position, so the lower ones are a bit more relevant, but all 4 of my guys here are pretty high. Let me know what you think of these takes. So my riser of the week is DJ Moore. Everyone's pretty high on this guy now, so I'm sort of late to the party, but he has a really, really good fixture coming up. He's clearly Darnold's number 1 target. He has 31% target share in the red zone. He's been targeted 10 plus times in his last 3 matches, and a lot of his points came in the junk time against the Cowboys, but as fantasy owners, we don't really mind where the points come. We just want them. So, yeah, I definitely think he's a top 10 option right now. And I don't know, people might still not be clued onto that who aren't that into fantasy. So maybe you can get him maybe undervalued. But yeah, DJ Moore's just absolutely killing the game right now. And yes, McCaffrey comes back this week, which might mean they run the ball a little bit more than they pass. But ultimately, with his percentage of target share, especially in that red zone, it bodes really well for his fantasy scoring this year. Next up, this is a guy who I really liked last week and this week as well, Brandon Cooks. I know Houston's sort of a team that no one really wants to touch with a barge pole right now, but Davis Mills probably only has 1 to 2 more weeks under center. Tyrod Taylor could come back, and even if he doesn't, what often happens to a lot of these, lesser ability, not saying he's crap, but like players who aren't playing at the highest level, the offensive coordinators sort of shorten down the playbook and they just let them target 1 or 2 receivers. And I think that's where Brandon Cooks is going to come to the fore. 27% target share in the red zone, which is brilliant for a guy who across the whole field has a pretty high target share. So to combine that with the high target share in the red zone is really promising. He's averaging 18 points at the moment, and that's with 2.5 matches from Davis Mills, who you'd think is targeting on quite a few occasions where the throw is not really catchable. So, yeah, we really like to see that for Brandon Cooks. He's someone who's sort of slept on all the time in fantasy. I had him in the back end of last year, and he was really, really good for me. And I just think if Tyrod Taylor comes back, all of a sudden this offense starts to put up points again, and he could be a real good option in your flex or your wide receiver 2 position. Fallers, I've got CD Lamb. I had this guy really high at the start of the season, as most did, but yeah, similar reasons to Dak Prescott, as I explained before. I'll just sort of say again what I said for Dak Prescott, because some people might just be watching the wide receiver section, but they've had less than 30 passing attempts in the last 3 games, respectively. Last week, they ran it 8 times in the red zone, only threw it 3 times. Their defense is improved on last year, so there's going to be less shootouts. CD Lamb specifically has only had 8 targets in his last 2 games, which is really, really poor for someone who we thought could have been a wide receiver 1. And especially Gallup might be back this week or next week, so that looks like I don't know where the targets come from, really. So it's really concerning. Cedric Wilson's also playing pretty well. So, yeah, at the moment, I think there's just too many mouths to feed, a bit like Tampa in Dallas, and I'm not that high on any of them at the moment except for Ezekiel Elliott. So, yeah, I'd be steering clear personally, and I think a lot of them have big name value and they play for the Cowboys, and the Cowboys get a lot of primetime games, so I think they're often overvalued. But yeah, for me, I'm not a fan of CD Lamb right now. My other faller is DeAndre Hopkins. In his 4 games so far this season, he hasn't had more than 8 targets yet, which is just really concerning. This is a guy who we expect to have 10 plus almost every week, and the Cardinals are absolutely humming on offense. And you'd think that would pair with a lot of ball to Hopkins, and it doesn't look that way. They're also running it a lot in the red zone, which is a real concern. And something else that I really don't like is Rondale Moore's only going to get better as the year goes on, so he's probably going to see more targets. And AJ Green's going to get more comfortable in this system, and he's probably going to see more targets as well. So, there's only so many people who can get more targets as the year goes on, and eventually you have to say who gets less. And I'm not saying Hopkins is going to get less, but people who are saying, he's just going to return back to his 13, 14 target form pretty soon, I don't quite see where that math adds up. And in saying that, I'm sure he'll score 60 this weekend, and you can all laugh at me, but yeah, right now I'm just really concerned about DeAndre Hopkins. Finally, into the tight end position, we have a 10-man league, 1 tight end, so I don't know if that's deeper than normal. I actually have no idea, but my risers are number 1, Kyle Pitts. He was really highly touted coming into the year. People had him as the tight end 4 on the draft boards, and he sort of slipped all the way down to tight end 8, 9 in a lot of draft boards rankings over the last couple of weeks, and his scoring hasn't been insane. So I think there would be a lot of owners who are quite low on him right now. However, if you look at his underlying numbers, there's actually not that much to be concerned about. He's had, on the weekend, he had 3 red zone targets, and he's had 8 on the season. And at an average rate, they convert every 4 red zone targets into a touchdown. So right now, he should have 2 touchdowns on the year, which would inflate his average pretty dramatically. Right now, he's just, well, whether it be him or Ryan, they're just not converting them into touchdowns. But if he's one of Ryan's favorite touchdown targets, their run game isn't killing it right now with Mike Davis struggling and the O-line struggling. I could definitely see Pitts becoming one of his favorite options down the stretch. And yeah, I just think, as all draftees do, he's going to get better as the season goes on. So I think Kyle Pitts is a good option this week, and he might be being undervalued. The other one's Dawson Knox. Everyone's sort of high on this guy at the moment, and I was sort of skeptical, but I did look at the numbers, and I can definitely see why everyone's keen on him. He's had 7 red zone targets on the year. He's in a absolutely flying high Bills offense, and there are quite a few mouths to feed there, but ultimately, if he's one of Josh Allen's favorite red zone targets, that's all we need. So, you don't want to get in a situation where you're getting these TD or bust tight ends, but I think Knox is a little bit more than that, and he's also a bit like Gronkowski. He's in a situation where he's going to score a TD that often, where it's almost not like it is better than just a TD or bust situation. So, yeah, I do like Dawson Knox, especially as some of the big dog tight ends aren't functioning as well as we were expecting. My fallers, I didn't want to put him in here because I've put him in here about 3 times, but I do own him, so I do see what he puts up every week, and that's George Kittle. On the weekend, I do think he got dogged by Trey Lance coming in. I think when Trey Lance came in, he had like 3 targets, 3 catches, and then by the end of the game, he had like 4 catches, 10 targets. So Lance was looking at him, which was good, but he wasn't hitting him. And I just think Kittle's going to be really solid. I think he'll definitely be a top 5 tight end, maybe top 4. But for me, what really limits his ceiling is he hasn't had a red zone target yet. And I'm hoping no one in my league is listening to this. But yeah, that's definitely a concern for me. I think there's been like 6 or 7 blokes who've had a red zone target, and he hasn't had one yet. And as we know, in the tight end position, scoring is so important. And yes, it's good that he can score points elsewhere, but ultimately, if he's not going to get in the pay dirt, then his ceiling is sort of brought down a bit. So I think just consistency over the year, he will be top 5. But right now, I think his name value and his reputation in fantasy precedes him. And I think you could definitely get something quite good for him when he's not really putting out much. And then finally, Dallas Goedert is my final faller. As I just mentioned, you don't want to TD or bust tight end, and ultimately Dallas Goedert has sort of become that. He's averaging around 3 catches per game. So let's say he has 3 catches for 30 yards. That's 6 points. So without TDs, he's averaging around 6 points. So yeah, that's just really, really not good to see. A lot of the Philadelphia receivers are only going to get better with Jalen Reagor, Devonta Smith, and Quez Watkins all very early on in their careers. And yeah, it's just not good to see. Dallas Goedert was actually someone who I was pretty high on the last couple of weeks, and I tried to get him from the owner of Goddard in my league, but ultimately I'm quite happy I avoided that. However, I do have Logan Thomas, who went down injured. There's obviously a lot of injured players who their stock fell this week, like Montgomery and Thomas and others, but I'm not going to include them because, it's a bit of a cop-out saying an injured player is a faller because that's sort of taken as read. So that's going to be it for the final NFL episode of the week. So if you haven't checked out the preview or the review, go back and check those out because they actually were pretty good episodes. And yeah, thank you for joining me. Good luck for your fantasy teams on the weekend. Let me know if you have any start sit dilemmas, trade suggestions for me, or you want trade advice. And yeah, see you next time. Cheers.